Hi everyone, welcome to the November 24th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to sort of combine the Pacecast and the forecast. We're going to start things off by doing a brief recap of last week, mostly focusing on just a couple of stakes races, one from Aqueduct and another from Churchill Downs, and then two pretty impressive two-year-old maiden winners, one in New York and one that got a lot of people talking out in California at Del Mar. So we'll talk about all of that at the start of the podcast. Then we'll move into some handicapping because we've got a ton of stakes action later this week. It's the Thanksgiving weekend, which really starts with some tracks running stakes races on Thursday. We've got a number of stakes races being run around the country on Friday, including the Grade 1 Clark Stakes at Churchill Downs. So we'll talk about that, as well as some races from New York, the Comely and the Forever Together on the turf, and also at Del Mar, they're running the Grade 2 Hollywood Turf Cup on Friday. So plenty of stakes action even before we get to the official weekend on Saturday and Sunday. So we'll try to get you started with some winners this holiday Thursday and Black Friday. So Craig, let's start things off with that recap. And we'll begin at Aqueduct, where they ran the Grade 3 Red Smith on Saturday. And the big favorite in here was obviously Sadler's Joy, though he probably didn't get the trip that he really needed. And that's me saying that, so tell me if I'm a little wrong about that, because I always try to make excuses for this horse. But the pace of this race, a horse just ran off on the front end, and I think it took a lot of riders out of their planned trips, because this horse just opened up such a big lead that the others, it's difficult to know when to move into that pace, and Sadler's Joy was just way too far back to make any impact by the time they got to the quarter pole.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me when a rider, and not necessarily the rider, I think the horse just kind of ran off. I don't think there was any plan to open up a dozen lengths on the field. But it always seems to cause a bit of chaos in New York, as the riders are so used to going so much slower that it doesn't seem like they know what to do. And generally, the horses who are far back usually leave themselves too much to do. And I think that was the case with our two favorites in here, Sadler's Joy and even Red Knight. Red Knight certainly made a good run and almost got there, but the ground North Dakota, the eventual winner, had the advantage he had early on was enough to beat these horses and hang on late. Just really, I like it when that happens, because it just seems to add some mystery to the race and throws things into chaos. But that said, I mean, I thought this was a really good effort for a Grade 3 race. All of the top 5 or 6 horses, I think it is, got 120 or higher TimeformUS speed figures, and it's a race that trip handicappers should like, because there's probably some stuff you could go back and dig into and find some horses that ran better than is going to look in the running lines, and some others that probably aren't quite as good as the running line looks.
Yeah, and the form of that Sycamore at Keeneland, which a lot of horses were coming out of into this race, really held up, as Red Knight was the winner of this race, and he ran fine to be second, but North Dakota was a horse who had a bit of trouble in the stretch of that Sycamore, and we were wondering maybe how much that really cost him that day. Apparently, it did cost him quite a bit, because he turned the tables on Red Knight here, and Zayad ran fine for third. He was the one that was in closest attendance to that early pace, and that probably took a toll on him late, because any horse that was anywhere near that pace just had nothing left for the stretch drive. And Sadler's Joy came with that late run, just not quite good enough. He was fourth here, but I thought all of the top 4 finishers ran well. Moving on to another race on that Aqueduct Saturday card, one that really caught my eye, was the 6th race. It was a maiden special weight for 2-year-old fillies going 1 mile and 1/16 on the turf. And the big favorite in here was the number 8, Freedom of the Press. She went off at 4-5. She had finished a very strong second in her debut at Saratoga. Chad Brown even entered her in the Miss Griot before she was scratched from that race with a fever at Belmont. So she made her second start here, and I think a lot of people just expected her to beat this field easily. But she ran into a couple of horses that might have serious talent. White Frost, the winner of this race, was getting on turf for the first time, and the number 12, Lijana, she was a first-time starter who ran second here. Both of these horses got some pretty big speed figures for 2-year-olds on the turf.
Yeah, it did. And these were ones where there was definitely an upgrade because of the slowish pace early. As I look over the chart now, I have to be honest, I'm going to have to go back and look at some of the times, particularly that half-mile time. Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in light of some of the others in here. And there were definitely some timing problems at Aqueduct this weekend on the turf. So it's something I'll take a look at. But I have no doubt it looks like these two ran a really big race. The winner, White Frost, got a 110. first time on turf, and Lijana got a 106 as a first time starter. But when you look at the other horses in the field, they basically ran the same figures or close to it they've been running, and these two just opened up a big gap on the rest of them, and it looks like a legitimately strong performance to me.
Yeah, this is one of those races where, I mean, I think the pace is actually correct. I was cross-referencing a lot of these with Trackus over the weekend, just because, as you said, there were some major timing issues with, especially the races on the outer turf course at Aqueduct this past week. But I was checking on this race because they came home unbelievably fast. I mean, these top two horses, really the winner, according to the teletimer, ran her final 16th in just over 5.5 seconds. And I checked with Trackus, and Trackus has exactly the same. These horses just flew home at the end of the race and really ran away from that highly regarded filly Freedom of the Press. So I just think these are two very talented horses. And White Frost, she certainly had the pedigree to take to turf. Her dam, Miss Frost, was a multiple stakes winner on the turf. There was other turf in the female family. And Lijana, she also had plenty of turf pedigree. So these are ones that could have some real talent.
Yeah, and that 110, to put it in perspective for a 2-year-old, that would have won a lot of 3-year-old stakes well into the 2020 season this year. That's definitely a big number on the turf for a 2-year-old. As I said, I mean, we talked about it many times. In June, July, August, we were still seeing races won, stakes races of the graded variety with figures like 112 and 113. So really big effort for me.
Moving on to Churchill Downs, the feature race last weekend was the Grade 3 Chilluki for the fillies and mares, and Finite seems like she's back on track. This 3-year-old filly showed so much promise over the winter last year, reeling off a series of stakes victories. Things kind of went awry at Fairgrounds when we last saw her before the layoff. Took her one start to kind of get things going again, but she showed that second place finish in the Raven Run at Keeneland was no fluke. She's just a much faster horse now, late in her 3-year-old season, and she won this Chilluki is just the best horse.
Yeah, whatever went wrong this spring has certainly been corrected. She looked very impressive, never really looked like a loser at any point. Got a 1:15 TimeformUS speed figure for the effort, so her forward progression continues, and I really look forward to see what she can do as a 4-year-old, because right now she looks like one moving in the right direction and has tons of talent.
Yeah, the one other note I had about this race was the runner-up, Sinenus, who I didn't like that much going into the race. She ran pretty well to be second because the pace, it's not color-coded in red in our PPs, but it was a race that was really dominated by horses that were coming from the back of the pack, and she was dueling up front the entire way with that horse Risky Mandate, who was pretty aggressive on the lead, and she put that one away and really was the only horse that was involved in the pace that was around at the finish. So I'd upgrade her a little bit coming out of this race, but Finite, she was just the best horse.
Yeah, I'd agree. She did get a 3-point upgrade because of the pace, and that, as you say, though it's not red, it was pretty close at a couple of the calls. It was just below the cutoff.
One more race to take a look at from last weekend was a maiden race for the 2-year-olds on Sunday at Del Mar, and this is one that got a lot of people talking. The word was out well in advance that Life is Good could run a little bit based on his morning workouts. He was bet down to 1-5 as a first-time starter, and he did not disappoint. He ran off to an impressive victory here, going the 6.5 furlongs.
Yeah, this was quite the effort. Never looked in doubt. He just ran a hole in the wind. He got a 1:13 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, which I honestly don't remember what the Breeders' Cup juvenile figure was. I think it was a little bit higher, but for a horse making his seasonal or his career debut, that's quite a number. We don't see a whole lot of 110 pluses. Somebody asked me on Twitter about horses who had debuted with a 110 or higher. That's something I haven't had a chance to look up yet, but I will, and I'll certainly make a tweet about it.
Yeah, this horse, he just had so much natural speed. Mike Smith was just kind of basically restraining him in the early going as he carved out those pretty quick fractions. And once he dropped his hands in the stretch, this horse just ran away from the field. I think it remains to be seen how far he ultimately wants to go. That's always a question with the Into Mischiefs. This debut reminded me a lot of Gamin's first start in California last winter when she won so easily. And she ultimately turned out to be a one-turn horse. We'll see if that's the same case with Life is Good, but this is certainly the way you want to start a career.
Yep, and we've seen this show before from Bob Baffert. Usually when they come out like this, there's some talent there for sure, and they usually don't go in the wrong direction. So looking forward to seeing where this one shows up next, because the sky sure seems to be the limit.
All right, let's get to the meat of today's podcast, which is going to be the handicapping of the stakes races later in the week. And we're going to begin on Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, at Churchill Downs, where the feature there is the Fall City handicap going 1 1/8 on the dirt for the fillies and mares. And this one's got, I think, a few clear contenders. The definite horse to beat is the number 3, Bonnie South, a 3-year-old stepping up to face older horses. She was probably a little bit unlucky not to win the Black-Eyed Susan last time, making that big sustained run from far back. But I think that run last time shows the risks that you always take with horses like this at short prices. Deep closers, they're not always reliable because they can't always get the right trip. And I think that's the big question with her in this Fall City.
It is. Our pace projector points to this being another difficult scenario for her. We have it as a race that should favor horses on her near the early lead. We have the 5 horse, our Super Freak, shown up on that lead all by herself with a pretty big gap to second place. So, I mean, as a betting person, sure, Bonnie South can win, but she's always the kind I'm going to take a shot against, and I'm going to go with our Super Freak. She didn't run particularly well last time, but she's run some when she was taking a bit off the pace in a pretty quick pace sprinter that day. But the 2 times before that, she's shown high speed early. She's been up near the front, and she ran similar speed figures to what Bonnie South did last time. So if I have to make a top pick in here, if I get anywhere near that 9-2 on our Super Freak, I'll be on her.
Yeah, I thought we would definitely see this race the same way, given that pace projector. Our Super Freak just seems like the right alternative to Bonnie South, and I'm with you. I'm not thrilled with taking a very short price on Bonnie South, though I do think she has the talent to win a race like this. She's run against some very good and very fast 3-year-old fillies and run competitively with them throughout this year, so I think she is the horse to beat. Just looking for a value play, I think the right one is our Super Freak. I never like to just dismiss poor performances without an excuse, and I didn't see an excuse for her spinster last time, and it is a concern that she just sort of got good for a little while, and maybe she's tailing off now, but she ran so well over the summer, both in that Molly Pitcher and the Shoe V, that I'm going to give her one shot to bounce back, and with this pace scenario, she's going to get the setup that she needs.
I do have a question for you on that, because I'm the same as far as races go like that, where I don't like excusing races where there's not a big excuse, and I don't think she had one. But me personally, I am more likely to do that for female racehorses. Just from experience, it seems like they are much more likely to bounce back from an effort. Do you look at things the same way, or does the sex of the horse not matter to you?
I know I've heard that as a theory quite often, and it's not something I've paid attention to that much, so I don't know if that plays into it so much for me. What I do look for in these situations is a drop in class, because sometimes when horses run into superior fields, they just can't produce their top efforts. And this is definitely a drop in class from the spinster that she faced last time, where Valiance, I mean, turns out she's really good right now, and Ollie's Candy and She Dares the Devil, some of the top females in the country, they're not in this field. So maybe the competition just got a little bit too tough last time. I would lean more in that direction, trying to find some excuse for a poor effort. But it does concern me with a horse like our Super Freak. But she should be a decent price, so I'm willing to forgive her under those circumstances. Let's stay at Churchill Downs and move on to Friday's card, where, as I mentioned earlier, the feature is the Grade 1 Clark Stakes, and this one's drawn a full field of 14 horses, very competitive field, though we do have a couple clear favorites in the number 3 Code of Honor, and I would assume the number 12 By My Standards. I haven't looked at the morning line for this race yet, but I would assume those two are the ones that are going to take the bulk of the money in here. What do you do with Code of Honor, Craig? He's stretching back out around the 2 turns. Wasn't successful doing that this summer in the Whitney. This is obviously not as tough a field as he faced in the Whitney, but what do you make of this horse's current form? I know the speed figures say one thing. A lot of people have been disappointed that he hasn't really won races this year. I'm kind of on the fence.
Yeah, I think he's probably clear. I mean, I think he is clearly the horse to beat in here. I think he ran better than looked last time in that Kelso when he was runner up to Complexity, a horse that ran a really good race that day, obviously. But he just didn't get much pace, and he's had that problem all year, really. The last two races are littered with blue fractions in our past performances, and I think his form's actually dirtied up a little bit if you look at finish positions in the races he was in, and I think he's going to be really tough to beat. I'm not saying I'll bet him. I'm sure he's probably going to be the favorite or very close to it, less than 2-1. But he's a horse I think is the horse to beat and would be my top pick if I had to make one in a race like this.
Yeah, in a race like this, which is, I mean, it's a grade 1 race, but really the only true grade 1 horse in here is Code of Honor, or I should say he's the only grade 1 winner in this field, I believe. So he definitely has a class edge over this field, and I'm not so concerned about the stretch out in distance. As you said, the pace of that Whitney and a few other races he ran in this year, it just didn't suit him at all, and he actually ran pretty well against an unfavorable pace scenario with the Met Mile prior to that. And last time out in the Kelso, I know he lost to Complexity and was just decidedly second best to that horse. But once again, Complexity got the jump on him. Complexity got to set a pretty moderate pace. And Complexity also is just really good right now. I mean, he was certainly not disgraced coming back in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile next time. He couldn't beat that impressive winner for Brad Cox, but he ran a decent fourth in that race. So I just think Code of Honor's form is rock solid, and he's simply the horse to beat in this race. The question is, how short of a price do you want to take? And I definitely prefer him to the other horse that I think is going to take money in here, the number 12, By My Standards. We've talked about By My Standards a lot. I think he's been the beneficiary of a lot of favorable pace setups and favorable trips when he's been successful. And to my view, he got a little bit exposed last time in the Breeders' Cup Classic when he had to come from a little bit farther off the pace. He was against real horses and he just couldn't be effective in there. Perhaps this is the kind of race where he can show his talent, but if he's among the shorter prices here, I want to look for some better value.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Of the two favorites, he'd be the one I'm against. His past performances are also just littered with those blue fractions for a slow pace, but often he actually benefits from them, whereas Code of Honor does not. And this race looks like it's definitely going to have some pace in it, if for no other reason than we have Bodie Express in the race. He's entered. I think he's shown on a clear lead, if memory serves. I'm sure that he is. He's coming off a big effort. I don't particularly think he's a contender in this race, but I do think he's got a shot. I mean, I think he's definitely going to set the pace. And a horse like By My Standards, who does his best running up close, doesn't have to have the lead, of course, but up close is going to have to run faster than he's used to, and that didn't work out very well in a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic. If I had to go with a horse who I think is probably going to run pretty good and be a bit more priced than the other two, it would be Owendale, and it's because of the pace that we see in here. Owendale always seems to run a pretty good race. He didn't have much of a chance from the 12 post in that Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile when Nick's Go just ran away from everybody, ran a big figure, but I think Owendale's held his form really well all year long. He's basically been running the same 120 speed figure every time out, and he should get plenty of pace for his late run, which is something that he hasn't had the benefit of many times this year.
Yeah, we agree on Owendale in the sense that he's getting back to what he wants to do in this race. He ran so well in this race last year, and they tried to make him into a miler this year, and I get it in the sense that you do get more pace in races going a mile, especially a one-turn mile, but I do think that's a little bit short for this horse, and I'm not going to hold a Stephen Foster against him at this track, at this distance, because there was no pace for him to close into in that race, and he's certain to get more pace in this one, and he ran fine last time out in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. Like I said, the mile was just too short for him, and he was outrun every step of the way and was really hitting his best stride just way too late. The pace projector, it is showing a fast pace, and I get why. That's often the case in large fields like this. I will say I don't see that much front-running speed in this race. Obviously, Bodie Express is expected to be on the lead, but beyond him, the horses that are projected to be right in behind him, none of them are horses that really figure to force the issue. None of them are really horses that need the lead to be successful. So I wonder how fast they're going to make Bodie Express go. I have that concern with Owendale because he is a horse that does come from far behind, and I think he's going to need some sort of pace collapse to be successful and win this race, beating a horse like Code of Honor, because they both are horses that come from far behind. So we'll see how that plays out. If I want a horse that's going to be a little bit closer to the pace, just as one to throw into the mix at a price, it's not so much Bodie Express, because Bodie Express seems to pop these huge speed figures at Gulfstream Park West and not really do it anywhere else, so I'm a little bit wary of him. But one horse at a price that I think could sneak in there is the number 11 Coastal Defense. He's a little lightly raced as a 4-year-old coming into this race, just making his 9th career start, but he seems like one that's just sort of reaching his full potential. I didn't think he had a major excuse to lose the Fayette last time, but I liked that he took a step forward in that race, and I think just given the trajectory that he's on, he's one that can continue progressing and get the right kind of stalking trip in here.
Yeah, I've got no problem with him. He's one of those horses that's just looking over his past performances, by our speed figures at least, he's improved every single time he's run, which is something you don't often see. But I mean, that's just a picture of perfect development there. And another step in that direction will put him right in the mix. I mean, it's not like outside of Code of Honor, who's run in the mid to upper 120s. The rest of this field is basically 120 type horses, and he can certainly get there.
Yeah, if Code of Honor shows up, it's probably going to be over. No, none of these others have a chance, but you're just kind of deciding whether you want to take that sort of price on him because he has thrown in a clunker before. Let's move out to Del Mar next, where on Friday they're running the Hollywood Turf Cup, a Grade 2 event going 1.5 miles on the turf. And I haven't seen the morning line for this race, but I would imagine we're going to have a pretty significant favorite in the number 5 Arklow. This horse was not disgraced at all in the Breeders' Cup Turf last time, finishing 6th by less than 4 lengths. And prior to that, he had been in pretty good form this year, but he's also Arklow. He doesn't win that often. He has seems to have a propensity for finding trouble in some races. So he's not a horse that I would love to take a short price on, but he's certainly the one to beat.
Yeah, he's going to be the favorite, I would imagine, for sure. And he's a horse shipping in, which is something, especially in these late year Southern California races, I think that you want to look for. But as you say, he is Arklow. He just doesn't win a whole lot of races. So I'm not sure that I have a lot of faith in him in this spot. So I'm probably going to look elsewhere. It is good to see Acclimates actually coming back to the races. That was one that surprised me a bit. I had just totally forgotten that he was out there as well. I think he's certainly a contender. I think he will be up there on the pace, but it just looks like a wide open race to me. So I think it's one where you want to take a shot with some others. And I'm going to stick to that shipper thing, but I'm not going to go with Arklow. I'm going to go with Lucario, who's shipping in for Graham Motion. I thought he ran very well in that Hirsch Classic behind Channel Maker, who took that race wire to wire. He got a 124 TimeformUS speed figure for the effort, and frankly, I just think him and Arklow are probably the 2 best horses in the field, and he's going to offer much more value.
Yeah, I have no problem with that assertion that these are the 2 best horses in the field, and I give a long look to Lucario because I do think he ran well last time in that Turf Classic, and horses like Channel Maker and to a lesser extent Sadler's Joy, they're just better horses than what we see in this field, with the lone exception of Arklow. My problem with Lucario is that watching his races, and even watching some of his races in Germany, he seems like a real grinder, and I don't see a big turn of foot from him, and I just worry about horses like this on the Del Mar turf course because that stretch is so short, and unless you find a horse that really gets into the right position by the time they get to the top of the stretch, it can be tough to get up when you don't have that real turn of foot. And I just worry about that with Lucario because he did come from farther back in the pack in the Turf Classic, and now he's facing a much larger field where he's probably going to again have to come from the back of the pack. So I just question that a little bit, but I don't dispute that he has the talent to win this race. I would look at some bigger prices if I was going to try to upset these two favorites. Obviously, I mean, you mentioned Acclimate. He's a little hard to trust coming off the layoff, but he did at one time have the talent to be competitive in a race like this. And I looked up the stats for Phil D'Amato in turf routes off layoffs of 240 days or more, 8 months or more. He's 8 for 36 over the past 5 years. That's 22% with an ROI of $2.32. So Phil D'Amato definitely can get these horses ready off layoffs. It's just a pretty big ask for Acclimate because this field might be even a little tougher than some of the races that he was winning in California in 2019. So I'd be somewhat afraid of him, though I wouldn't make him my top pick in this race. The horse that I'm most interested in is actually the number 12, Another Mystery. This horse has been gigantic prices in his last 2 races, and I mean justifiably so, because when he came into Michael McCarthy's barn back over the summer, he really didn't have any credentials to speak of. But he ran okay behind some familiar faces that we're also seeing in this race in that Del Mar handicap. I didn't think he got the most clever ride that day, as Victor Espinoza was sort of committed to setting him down on inside and making a move inside of a tiring runner in the stretch of that race, whereas the horses that were really successful made their moves on the outside. So I think he lost the momentum in that race. And then last time out in John Henry Turf Cup, I mean, he was no match for United, but United had a huge pace advantage that day. He was just allowed to waltz along on the front end uncontested. And Another Mystery was the only horse that was really making up ground from the back of the pack. Again, he had to sort of wait a little bit at the top of the stretch, search for room, dive inside, and he was really finishing at the end of that race. Now, that was 1.25 miles, and he's going 1.5 miles in this spot, but everything about the way he runs and his pedigree to me suggests that he wants to go 1.5 miles. For these same connections, he's actually a 3/4 brother to a horse named Ioya Big Time, who used to run in these longer 1.5 miles and beyond races in stakes a number of years ago and was successful. So I think stretching out to the 1.5 miles is what Another Mystery really wants to do. He's getting Mike Smith for this race, and he's going to be a price again. So he's just a horse that I thought would offer some value in this spot.
Yeah, I've certainly got no problems with him as a long shot. If I had to pick among the locals, he would be the one I would go with for sure, especially given the price he's going to be.
Let's now move on to Aqueducts, where on Friday they're running one graded stakes and a couple of other stakes races on the turf. We're going to discuss one of them. Let's begin with that graded stakes, though. It's the 8th race on that Friday card, and it's the Cumley going 1.1 miles for the 3-year-old fillies. I wonder how they're going to bet this race, because you've got the number 1, Miss Marissa, coming out of a victory in Black Eyed Susan. She was an upsetter that day, beating the heavy favorite Bonnie South. And turns out that performance that she won again at a big price at Saratoga over the summer, winning at 20-1, that was no fluke because she validated it in the Black Eyed Susan. But you've also got a couple of horses coming out of allowance victories, like the number 6, Mrs. Danvers, the number 5, Thankful, and even the number 8, Gale. They all have upside. So it's just kind of tough to compare all these horses because they're coming in from so many different directions.
Yeah, it is. And it's hard for me to have some real strong opinions yet. Your morning line wasn't available when I checked. I still don't think it's there. Going to need to get to work on that, I think. I'm just teasing with you. But yeah, there's horses shipping from all over. But the horse that really interests me is actually Gale, who you mentioned, coming in for Jonathan Thomas. Comes out of a couple really big wins at Laurel, one on the turf, one in an off the turf race. But without the benefit of a morning line, I think this one might get away at a price, and I think she's got some real talent. I went back and watched that replay, look at some of the horses she was beating, and you have to get past the fact that she started in maiden claimers and nobody claimed her, but I just think she's one that people missed on, because I don't think that 118 TimeformUS speed figure she comes in sporting last time out is any fluke, and it's just a matter of if she's going to appreciate the second turn on dirt. She's already handled it on turf fairly easily, and I think she's going to be up front all by herself and be tough to run down.
Yeah, I probably could have led with that morning line if I was being nice, because I'm the one who has access to that information. I made Mrs. Danvers 5-2 as the slight favorite over Miss Marissa 3-1. I put Thankful at 4-1, and I put Gale at 9-2 as the fourth choice. And I agree with you, Craig. Of those four horses that I mentioned at the top, the one that appeals to me most is Gale. The 118 last time, it does seem a little high to me for that field, but it's hard to really knock the horses that she was running against because she beat them by over 13 lengths. So when you win by that kind of margin, does it really matter who finished behind you? She just looked so good getting on dirt for the first time. And it turns out that maybe she just is a dirt horse. And, sometimes they say that they run these horses on turf because they just seem like horses that want to go two turns. And some traders can be reluctant to start horses out in dirt routes because that can be a little bit demanding for horses making their debuts. But she definitely seems like one that relishes the dirt, which is no surprise. She's a daughter of Tonalist, so she's supposed to have no trouble handling the 1.125 distance. And also, there is some speed in this race, but I don't think any other horses in here have the kind of speed that she possesses, or at least the kind of speed that we've seen from her in her last couple of starts. And getting out to the front here with an advantage, that could make her tough to run down in here if she's able to see out the 9 furlongs. So I'm definitely afraid of her. As for those favorites, look, I mean, Miss Marissa, I think that she's shown at this point, she is the real deal. That victory against Bonnie South, I mean, I can't knock it. She won fair and square that day, and she backed it up with that performance at Saratoga 2 back. So I think she's a contender in this race. I just think this time she's going to have to run down a horse like Gale, who might have to jump on her. As for those two horses coming out of allowance races, the number 5 Thankful and the number 6 Mrs. Danvers, they actually faced off when Thankful beat her on September 27th. If you watch that race, I think Mrs. Danvers probably should have won. Joel Rosario did what he does and got a little too cute on Mrs. Danvers, trying to squeeze in between horses at the top of the stretch, and he had to alter course, go inside, and he probably cost her the victory that day. Mrs. Danvers, she's just a horse that I don't completely trust. She's never really gotten that much faster. And speaking of speed figures that I don't totally trust, that 114 that Thankful got in that September 27th race, if you look through the charts, that's just a number that horses are not running back to. They're generally running 10 points or more slower next time. So I'm a little bit leery of that number because Mrs. Danvers, even when she came back and won her next start, she too ran significantly slower. And also Mrs. Danvers just has this habit of getting really rank early in her races, and I think that's prevented her from going even longer, going 2 turns yet in her career. And I thought it was curious that Chilluki McGahee added the blinkers last time because that seemed to even get her more keyed up in the early going, and I think it even took away from the finish that she could have had at the end of that race because she had to work pretty hard to get up to win as the 1-2 favorite. So I'm just not quite sure that I trust that she's going to get the right trip given what's going on with her. Of those horses we just discussed, I like Gale the most, but I wanted to get even more creative. So I went with a long shot in this race, and that's the number 3 Ice Princess. I just like this horse. I think that she ran pretty well over the winter at Aqueduct last year. Now remember, she had just turned 3 years old back then, so she ran a couple speed figures in the high 90s on the TimeformUS scale. It stands to reason that she's gotten significantly faster since then, but we just don't know because she hasn't really run that much recently. She came back off the layoff last time in that Fleet Indian at Saratoga, and she spent a long time eating dirt on the rail in that race and behind the eventual winner, making sense. She finally got through on the inside at the end of that race and snuck up the inside to just miss. I thought that was a perfect prep race for her. Now she's coming back going 1 1/8, which I think is a great distance for her because she just seems like one that wants to run all day. And I think this is a race where she can take a big step forward on the speed figure scale because she's not running that much slower than some horses that are going to be shorter prices than she is.
Yeah, I got no problem with that. I just want to echo your sentiments on that Thankful Mrs. Danvers race. I've never particularly trusted Mrs. Danvers as it is. I think she's just one of those horses who got a reputation early because she made a big close in one of her early races and people latched onto her. But she's never really developed. But so I'm never, she's always going to be a horse I'm looking to beat. And just wanted to make that point. I agree about the figure. It's actually one I need to go revisit and see if I had any questions when I made it that day. I don't think I did, so I probably wouldn't adjust it. But if I look at my notes and I had some hesitation at the time, it's one I would consider changing.
Let's Finish things up on this podcast with another stakes race from Friday at Aqueduct. That is the 9th race. It's the Forever Together going a mile and a 16th on the inner turf course. This one for the fillies and mares. And I'll start with the morning line this time. I made the number 12 the favorite. Tap It Today at 2-1 over the number 9. My Heart Belongs to Daddy at 4-1. And the number 4, Feel Glorious at 9-2. Those are the short prices that I saw. And I think Tap It Today on the outside, she does seem like the horse to beat. She beat arguably a tougher field last time in the Athenia. She got a good trip in that spot, but she was 3 wide most of the way without cover. The thing that was good about it is that she was close to a relatively slow pace and was able to get the jump on some closers in there. But she's just improved a lot recently for Chad Brown, and she gets Jose Ortiz here with a lot of the top riders out of town in New York this weekend. So she just seems like she's got a lot going for her in this race.
She does. I mean, I'm a little leery of her just because of the 12 posts. We'll see how many actually make the gate and if she's able to move inside a little bit. But for a horse who likes to run pretty close up, that could be problematic for her. But like you say, I don't really have any knocks on her. But for me, this is a race that's just going to come down to the board. There's a lot of evenly matched horses in here on our speed figures. I think there are some who I would like to find a reason to bet. I think Feel Glorious is one of those. Probably didn't get the best chance given that slow pace early last time. Who could maybe jump back up and run one of her better races. There was one other one. Simplicity is one who I think could have a big jump waiting in her. She's going to need that, but similarly, she hasn't had a lot of pace to run into. But for me, it's just going to come down to the board because I don't have a whole lot of strong opinions in here, and it's just hard for me to guess which way a race like this is going to be bet. And I would like to favor it a lot more if she didn't have that 12 post, but again, it's hard to say if they're all going to go. But given her running style, does that give you any pause?
Yeah, I think if you're taking a stand against Tap It Today here, it's due to the post position, and it's a legitimate concern because they're on the inner turf course here, so got some tighter turns, and she's going to have to save ground at some point from that outside post position. And I mean, it's not a guarantee that Jose Ortiz is going to be able to get her over because a lot of horses in this field seem to have similar running styles. So she's going to need a little bit of luck because it's not like she was so much the best over Feel Glorious last time that I wouldn't be, I'd be against taking Feel Glorious if she's going to be a much better price. And as you said, the pace of that Athenia, it favored Tap It Today more than it did a deep closer like Feel Glorious. And I just think getting back to this tighter turn configuration at Aqueduct, that's more the kind of course that Feel Glorious prefers because she's one of these fillies who's got a big turn of foot that she can use at the end of a race after being held up early. And those kind of trips are typically most effective over courses where you got that stretch run off those tight turns. And if Junior Alvarado, who knows her very well, can get her into the right spot and work her into the clear at the top of the stretch, I expect her to come with a big late run. And as around the third choice in this race, I think that she's very dangerous. So I would certainly use her. The horse that I'm completely against, and one that I kind of want to get your take on, Craig, is the number 9, My Heart Belongs to Daddy. I mean, she's just gotten so fortunate in her recent races against New York breds. She was never a speed horse in the past, but in her last 3 races, it's just like the other horses that have been running against her just seem allergic to the lead. I mean, the jockeys just make no attempt to put any pressure on her, and she's gotten away with such moderate paces in those races. I can't see how that's going to be the case here, especially with a stretch-out sprinter like the number 6 I'll Handle the Catch in the race.
Yeah, we have her shown well back in the pace projector. She's not even in the top 5. If she winds up on a lonesome early lead again, I may pull what little hair left that I have out. But that said, even if she somehow did, I still am not sure she's good enough to win a race like this. I don't want any parts of her against the field this deep. This is just much tougher company. Our race rating of 115, it's kind of an average of what you'd expect of maybe the top 4 or 5 finishers, and she's never even run that figure even once. So she's one I'm definitely against as well.
Yeah, like I said, I'm against her, and I certainly respect those 2 horses coming out of the Athenia, Tap It Today, and Feel Glorious, but I would want to take a shot in this race with a slightly bigger price, and it's actually one of the other Chad Brown horses. That's the number 10, Miss Tehran. She's made one start in the U.S. so far. It was against a N2X field in Monmouth last time. If you watch that race, I think she clearly should have won. She just got into a little bit of trouble coming around the far turn, got shuffled back a little bit, was in traffic, had to alter course a couple times, and she finally got into the clear with about 70 yards to go and almost got to the leader, making up a good 2 lengths during the final strides of this race, but just couldn't quite get there. The winner of that race, would be a gigantic long shot in here, but I just think Miss Tehran's a much better horse than that. And the horse that was third in there, Orglan, she's another Chad Brown horse who was also making her U.S. debut there, and she came back out of that race and won a race at Belmont a few weeks ago, very impressively, improving her speed figure. So I think that might be a better race than it seems, especially among the horses that were trying to close. And Miss Tehran, she hadn't run in almost 2 years prior to that, but if you go back and watch her last race as a 2-year-old over in France, she was very visually impressive, albeit against a weaker field. But I just think she's a horse that we haven't gotten to the bottom of yet, anywhere near that. We just hasn't tapped into her full potential, and this is a big step up in class, but she's going to be a bit of a price in this race as the other Chad Brown, and I think she's got a bit of a chance.
All right, well, that's going to be my homework assignment before Friday, to go watch some of her races, because I admittedly haven't watched any of them, and I just kind of glanced over when I saw that Monmouth running line. So I will definitely take another look, because I'm open to a lot of things in this race.
Yeah, this group of races we talked about, I think we've got some clear favorites in a lot of them, but some of these horses just aren't totally trustworthy usually, mostly given their running styles or post positions. So I think these are some decent races where you can take shots against favorites. Well, that's going to be it for this week, and actually it for our podcasting this week, as we've got the Thanksgiving holiday coming up on Thursday, so we're not going to do our typical TimeformUS forecast on Friday. So our next podcast will be a week from today on Tuesday, when we recap some of this weekend's races, and there should be plenty to recap given all the stakes racing happening around the country, and that'll be out next Tuesday, the TimeformUS Pacecast. So Craig, always good to recap these races and do a little handicapping with you. Remember that you can always listen to both of these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week. Have a great holiday, everybody, and we'll be back next Tuesday.